thank you for both of your times. And I know you were both instrumental in the days right after what the summer of 1967. So I'd love for you to reflect on that for us.
Well, Joe, you called me to be on New Detroit. Perhaps you can start off with that.
That's a good way.
Well, I was called the day after the riot took place by the governor, and I was called out of my office. I was carrying on a meeting with associates, and he said, "We're faced with a real problem here, Joe. It's obvious that the public sector has been discredited. We're not 100% certain what we should be up to or doing, but we want to have somebody from the private sector pull together a committee and give us your report on what you think the community needs to do to move forward again." And about 10 minutes later, I had a call from Mayor Kavanaugh. Same thing, said, "Joe, we hope that you'll accept this thing. You can't do anything but say, 'Yes, sir, we'll do the best we can.'" But I think that it might be interesting, Judge, if you would talk about what you were doing, because before I called you to be one of the first members of this New Detroit committee, you were on the street working the crowd, trying to settle things down. Maybe you'd share some of those thoughts.
Well, you're right, Joe. The first director, I guess, was Bill Patrick, who you contacted, and he was the head of New Detroit, and the city was burning up, and Henry Ford II got the CEOs of General Motors and Chrysler and all the top people involved in saying that we've got to do something about this. But Joe, as you remember, in one of the first meetings, it came up, I've forgotten who said it, but they said, "We've been talking to the wrong black people in this community." And I remarked, and I think Art Johnson, "You haven't been talking to the wrong people. You haven't been listening to us. We told you about police brutality. We told you about poor housing. We told you about unemployment. We told you about the educational system in the city. And this has just all exploded. You just haven't been listening. But don't say you haven't been talking to the right people." So it was very interesting. You remember that, Joe? That was a heated argument in that place at that time. And you were chairing the meeting. And we had to get that straight because Reverend Clegg and these radical people were burning this. They said, "Let's burn the city down." And so we had to explain through New Detroit that you've got to listen to what people have been saying. And I think it was Henry Ford that told all these CEOs, corporate CEOs, that when we have meetings now in New Detroit, we want you to come and not any representative from your company.
And those are good points, Damon. That's exactly how it started. I think that one important part of the organization of the New Detroit Committee was the advice I received from a number of people, and from you in particular, that rather than the typical kind of committees that were formed in the past that had a group of chief executive officers and heads of community leadership, that we needed some young people that had been perhaps involved in the street problems, and people that weren't, young people that weren't afraid to speak out and tell it as they saw it. And we made some contacts, and we interviewed 3 individuals that we thought would add a dimension to New Detroit. And it sure as heck was a dimension because they spoke even a different language than we did. There was we had some distinguished sort of people. Well, some of them had mustaches and all, you know. They were sort of the older types. And in the first meeting, it just got right off. Hey, you fellas, you don't, and they're not that kind of polite language. There were a few four-letter words mentioned occasionally, and you got to hear exactly what's going on. So we received a tutorial from the first meeting and ever though after that.
Well, Joe, you're absolutely right. It was shocking to these corporate executives, CEOs, and Joe had so constructed the New Detroit Committee that he brought these street people onto the New Detroit. And they used all sorts of language and roughed it up and cussed them out and said what they hadn't been doing to black folks and things like that. And they all had to sit there and listen to it. And I thought it was helpful. It hadn't been done before.
Right, right. Well, let's maybe back up a week or so or a month or whatever it was, but maybe it would be interesting to share if you have a recollection of where you were, where you were that week of July 23rd, 1967. Were you in Detroit? How did you react immediately before New Detroit even to what was going on?
Well, I don't know. The riots exploded as a result of an after-hour joint
Right.
on 12th Street. I don't know what happened. It just exploded, and I was, along with Judge Fikens, co-chairs of the Michigan Civil Rights Commission, and it started on 12th Street and kept going and going and going, and we thought that we could contain it, but we couldn't. It was moving rapidly. And you had men like Reverend Clegg and some of these radicals who were encouraging burning down the city, you know, and these white folks don't care anything about it. And I really think that the 67 riots was the tremendous reason there was such an exodus of companies out of the city of Detroit. That 67 riots, because that was a real, it wasn't a riot like 43 in terms of race fighting each other. That wasn't it at all. But it was an explosion dealing with a lack of concern and sensitivity of the white corporate leadership in this country, in this city, who were not concerned about the welfare of black folks. The police department was limited in terms of black representation. The school board was inefficient. Housing was bad. Unemployment was bad. All of these things exploded, but it wasn't a race riot like it was in 1943.
That's a common statement that 43 was different, and the common factor being that they were both violent, but the 67 riot was much more against property than people, which is kind of an interesting parallel.
Well, it wasn't by accident that the governor appointed Joe Hudson and Mayor Kavanaugh agreed, because Mr. Hudson is he may not like what I'm about to say, but he was well respected in this community. And they had to get a white person who could bring all of these groups together. And it was Joe Hudson. The community and the city was delighted when Joe Hudson was selected as the head of New Detroit. And he conducted himself just greatly during this period.
Well, thank you, Damon. That's a wonderful comment on your part. One of the things I remember about the early days of New Detroit is that everyone came to the table with the understanding and the command that we all had to speak up. We had to speak our minds. You didn't hold anything back. You had to respect everybody else around the table. And we had 39 members, and our attendance was very good. In that first year, we had meetings every month. We had committee meetings in between, and we had a staff helping that were recruited from organizations within the city to help us organize to make the work that we're doing effective. And there was a wonderful sense of participation. And the press sort of had a field day on the whole thing. They reported it. I won't give them an A, B, or an F, but they caught the controversies that were going on, so that they made an awareness in the community of what's going on. And after every meeting, I, on behalf of the committee, held a press conference, and the press was oftentimes very argumentative and the like. And there were people that attended the press conference that weren't part of the press, that wanted to move on into more activist things. Well, fortunately, I was the head of the jail Hudson company at the time, and we had a whole city block that was that building, and the groups all said, we're going to picket you. Well, we had a lot of entrances, so we had at least 15 places that they could picket, and I think everybody took that with good grace. But the community got involved also on what was going on, and they took very careful attention as to what we were trying to do and what we maybe should have been doing a little bit differently. So we had a lot of communication with the community and with groups, but the committee stuck to it. And when I invited 39 people to join the committee, we didn't have anybody turn it down. They recognized that this was a serious matter for the entire state of Michigan, certainly for metropolitan Detroit, and they all accepted the challenge.
Joe, I don't know, it's sort of simplistic for me to say this, but how did we get the name New Detroit? How did that come up? Did you was that your idea, or whose idea was it?
I can't claim credit for that idea, but when the first 3 or 4 or 5 days we got together and called that first meeting, we had a number of people that had good creative thinking. And they said, you've been called by the governor and by the mayor to set things right, to give us a roadmap as to how we can move forward. And somebody in the room, I wish I could remember too, to give him or her credit, said, let's call this New Detroit. And it seemed to make sense because it was an opportunity. And if you look back now, 45, close to 50 years, a lot of things positive have happened. Sure, there have been negative things that happened too. We went through bankruptcy, but we came out of bankruptcy promptly. And there's a lot of new spirit, there's new economic development. But I think the important thing talking with you today is there still is one heck of a lot of work to do. We have to get deeper and further along in making this total community a community that all people will be comfortable and being proud to be part of it.
Yeah, I think New Detroit is celebrating its 50th year, I think, this year.
Probably, or 2017, I would guess.
Yeah.
You know, that's
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, in a couple of years, right.
Yeah.
Well, we've worked with them and continue to work with them on this project as well, because they've done a lot, to your point, a lot of good
Well,
work.
I talked to Joe maybe a year or two ago. There were 4 of us from the original new committee. It was Bill Patrick, Art Johnson, Joe Hudson, and myself. Now, Art Johnson is now deceased, and Bill Patrick is out in California. So it's Joe Hudson and me and Bill Patrick out of the original New Detroit. So the longevity is still around. Joe was born on July the 4th, and so was I.
Oh, I didn't know that. I know
yeah.
that, but,
So
He's got me by a few years. And,
Yeah,
I
by a
keep,
few years, yeah.
I keep trying to learn from him.
Excuse me.
But,
So,
Bob, I think what we're talking about today is an opportunity to try to pick up what we have learned or what we haven't learned in the last almost 50 years. There have been new populations born in this community. There's new leaders come, some leaders have gone. We need to be certain as we look forward to celebrating 50 years after New Detroit was formed when we come to 1907, that the community, and particularly the young people in school, come to know and understand what happened in 1967 and why did it happen, and then how did we work forward from there, and the role that every citizen of this region should play in answering some of the opportunities and the challenges that are before us. So I hope that that will be part of what this program is going to accomplish.
Well,
yeah, I was happy
yeah,
to read in the paper that the population now of Detroit is growing, and that whites are moving back into the community. And I think one of the most significant things to happen is that Mayor Duggan was elected mayor of this city with a black population of over 80%. And he's done an outstanding job. But to me, that indicated, now he ran against a black person, and the black community, almost without exception, voted for Mayor Duggan to be mayor of the city of Detroit, because we didn't want the same old thing from a black person that we've been going through. And Mayor Duggan has enlivened this community, and I was just pleased with the way he got the Ford Foundation to come in here and say they're going to commit themselves to the city. And the bank, Chase Bank, is coming in, and
right.
he's done all of these things to revitalize it, and we could say new Detroit is coming back.
Well, on a personal note, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think Mayor Duggan's often said is the measure of his success is going to be if the population grows. If there's more people, black, white, Syrian, or otherwise, if the population grows, that's going to be the measure of his success as a mayor, which I think is a good measure.
Yeah.
But Joe, back to your point a bit is the make no mistake, the entire purpose for this project is to move the community forward, and I think celebrate our successes, because there have been successes, but there's still a large population who aren't participating in that success. So how can understanding what happened in '67 through sharing of stories and understanding the facts in an inclusive way make people aware of what happened and how we might act differently or do things differently going forward?
Well,
that's the intent.
I was born in Detroit. I went from Columbian High School to McMichael to Northwestern and never had a black teacher. But Governor Snyder, along with Mayor Duggan, have done a great job. Both of them are committed to bringing in Detroit back. We'll never have it like it was years ago, but I think it's moving in the right direction. I was out to Belle Isle the other day, and it looked like the old Belle Isle that I grew up in.
Amazing.
And so things are just going well. I live in the riverfront apartments, and the apartments are totally integrated. People are moving in all the time, white and black. And so I've just seen a new energy, a new commitment, and a new leadership based on Mayor Duggan and Governor Snyder.
I'll make a little comment that shows the affection that Judge Keith and I have for each other. we've been at a number of meetings together, and you get down 20 or 25 people, and they ask you to introduce yourself. And so we go around the table, and Judge Keith, I'm Judge Damon J. Keith, citizen of Detroit. And I had that backwards, but it'll play out pretty quickly. And it came to me, and I said, I'm Joe Hudson from Detroit. And Judge Keith was next, and he said, oh, I'm Damon Keith from Grosse Pointe. So I'm sorry I messed that up, and I could do it over again if you want. But the fun thing about that is that while I was not born in Detroit, I came from Buffalo, New York, but we've had good fortune of having a nice family, and out of 10 grandchildren, one of them in recent years has come as a job here in the Detroit area, and he's been living in Detroit for the last 3 or 4 years. And one of my resources for information of what's going on and positive is this young fellow working at Ford Motor Company, living on 1st, 2nd Avenue and now out at Stroh's River Place in Detroit. And I can't imagine and compare him against other 9 grandchildren. He is just as enthusiastic about his life, where he's living and working, the people he's meeting in all walks of life by living and working in the Detroit area.
Yes.
Right. I was telling Gene Dreicher this morning about our daughter, same story, graduating from University of Michigan this year, and in the business school, so she's got lots of people that want to interview her, and she's focusing on Detroit as a very, very strong possibility.
Yeah.
So we're and it's not because she wants to live with us. Make no mistake. But she wants to live right around this neighborhood here. But one of the things that you mentioned, leadership, Governor Snyder and Mike Duggan, and one of the criticisms about Detroit, where it's going, is who's the next generation of leaders, and how do we ensure that leadership that's going forward is representative of the whole community? I don't know if you have a comment on that, but I think that's a real focus of what we want to come out of this project, is kind of the handoff, or the next generation of leaders, because there is some criticism about the new people moving in, the people that were here, and how do you bring that all together?
Well, you can't make leadership. It has to come out of what a person is doing. Now, we had a very terrible setback under Kilpatrick.
Right.
That was devastating. He was a black man who had plenty of talent, a great deal of ability. I swore him in both times as mayor of the city of Detroit. And I was heartbroken when I found out through the papers all of the corruption and misdeeds that were done. So that was a setback in terms of the image of our community. And I think we've turned the corner on that now with Duggan and a new mayor of the city, new chief of police, the new head of the fire department, and the new companies that have come back in to the city. But it was a tremendous setback in terms of the image of Detroit under Kilpatrick. And then the bankruptcy thing. But still, with those two things,
Yeah.
we've turned the corner and we're moving forward, I think. But we can't name people. That's one of the problems I think we've had before. The white community cannot name who they think should be the black leader in this community. It has to come based on a commitment that a black person has in terms of this community, and with a proven record as to what to be done.
I agree completely with Judge Keith on this. And I do think that there's one thing that seems to be happening within organizations, more so than in past years. Use the Detroit Institute of Arts as an example. They have developed a young person's group, and they have the responsibility for coming to know the museum, but they organize functions. Some of them are serious functions, some of them are parties. They raise money, they're given to take ownership in the museum and to be a part of it. And they have a very broad, diverse makeup. And the powers that be see that it's a diverse group, that it isn't just some small clique. The Economic Club in Detroit has every program, tables with sponsors from the business community of students. And they are working to make that a more viable, continuous group. They're getting it to the point that they're going to have that group have its own meetings, to choose its own officers, to develop its programs and interests in the community. And again, diversity is a basic element of that. Now, those leaders in the future that we know will come forward, good or bad, we've got to be sure that we're all working to identify young people and give them the opportunity of getting to know the total complexity of the community and a chance to show and learn leadership. And I think that's happening in most organizations. It'd be the same thing in labor unions, business groups.
Right. No, I think that's definitely, top of mind for many people and many organizations, including ours.
I think also that the two daily papers, the Free Press and the Detroit News, are committed to making this a better place. Not that they weren't before, but I think the way they are printing the news and the accomplishments of blacks and white in an integrated society is setting the tone for the community. And I think years ago it wasn't that type of commitment from the both newspapers, but now the Detroit Free Press has a black man as the head of the editorial page.
Right.
Yeah, and the Detroit News has just hired a former editor of the Michigan Chronicle on its staff, and they have a black woman as an assistant editor over there at the Detroit News. So there was a time, it's hard for you probably to remember, Bob, you don't know, but Joe and I do, when there were no black representations at the Detroit News or the Free Press. So things are moving, but the papers have an obligation here too, as well as the radio and TV stations.
Right. I think that we all recognize that the energy and the enthusiasm and the happenings in downtown and in midtown are wonderful, but not sufficient for the entire city of Detroit. There's a lot of thinking going on about it. The mayor is very cognizant of this, sure. And he's divided now. We have city council by district. There's a natural way of relating to the subsections of the city. Corktown is an obvious area that with restaurants and the opportunity will begin to come along slowly at first, but I think it has every bit of the potential of what's happened in Midtown. 7 Mile and Livernois is an opportunity for development. Obviously in the Mexican town and southwest Detroit, there are areas. Now all of us have to find ways to identify private investment, public support. The current administration of the city of Detroit is doing a marvelous job of cleaning up every part of the city. Empty lots, the grass is being cut. You can notice that wherever you drive in Detroit. The garbage collection. So we just have to concentrate, whether you're in the public sector or in the private sector, we have to look for ways to invest. There's nothing like getting jobs into other neighborhoods and to have a sense of purpose. So it's going to be something take quite a few years to get the success of downtown and midtown spread out. but I'm convinced that it will be done because we're going to be an incomplete city unless every sector has a chance of benefiting from the economic opportunities, from the cultural opportunities. Again, citing the Detroit Institute of Arts, the Detroit Historical Society, all are developing programs where we have buses bringing in students to take advantage of the cultural resources. We have vehicles that take many museums out to the communities so that they can understand that. We're even taking reproductions of art throughout the metropolitan area and in the city of Detroit to have exposure. So this sensitivity needs to be given a high priority for all of us.
Right, I would agree. And it's, to your point, I think it's many efforts. There's no silver bullet.
Right.
That the cultural institutions can do some, the public sector can do some, the government can do some, industry can do some, but it's a combination of a variety of things. Let's see, any last thoughts for that next generation? When I was with Gene Drecker this morning, he said, or it was Elaine who said, I feel like I should be a millennial.
What did Elaine say?
She says, although I'm old, I should be a millennial, a 20-something, she says, because that's how she thinks. And she wants to be here to see how all this plays out. And I said, I agree with that.
There's an old Chinese proverb, a journey of 1,000,000 miles begins with the first step.
Right.
Detroit has not only taken the first step now, it's moving forward. And it's hard to predict the future, but when you see these wonderful things, this fellow, is his name Gilbert, who's buying up all of Detroit? My God, what more can you say about a man or a corporation when he's investing this type of money in a city?
Right.
And you can't overlook that. He has confidence in this community and is showing it financially. And other big financial institutions are not coming in, being a part. They tell me a lot of his buildings are almost full of tenants now. It's wonderful.
Yeah. You just try and drive here at rush hour, and it's a different place than it was 2 years ago. That's for
yeah.
sure. In a very good way. In a very good way. Any last comments? I think Joe?
I don't like to give last comments.
Or
That suggests that this is my last chance to make a comment. And I think the judge and I will both be around to make comments and be available and be active. I think it's an honor for me to see how the judge continues to be a vital force. People go to him for advice. He spreads his inspiration throughout this whole community. So we have a lot of leadership in Detroit, and we have to encourage more to come forward and help us grow the community.
And it's good, just in closing, that our athletic, the professional football is back in Detroit from Pontiac. You have the Detroit Tigers here, you see, and the Red Wings. Look what Mike Ilitch is doing down Woodward now. He's just taken up half of that in terms of
Amazing.
Commitment, millions of dollars.
Yes.
Yeah, and for the Red Wings, and he's going to have stores and everything down there. So there's a commitment by people of wealth and money that this city can be turned around, and there's evidence that they're not only talking about it, but they're investing in it financially.
Right. Make a huge difference.
And in our next interview,
Yes.
we'll talk about the success of the Detroit sports teams, but we'll wait and do that on another day.